everyone. My name is Shirin Sabetghadam, and it's an honor to be here today with you. So my presentation is related to my practice in the quantitative method class that I'm teaching to graduate students at the Department of Public Policy. This is a quantitative method course for policy analysis. And my motivation for making this is that, going back to last semester, I have saw students misusing AI. I saw students, generating the data set that doesn't exist, and or they are doing the analysis that there is no reasoning, behind that, and they don't understand what they are doing. They also, sometimes, get the answer to the problem sets, and they don't have any idea of whether or not that's correct or not. And also I have lots of students that they are very cautious about using AI on the other side. So they don't know what they are doing is correct or not. They are concerned about the ethical use of AI. And some of them are concerned about violating academic integrity, and due to that they are not using AI. To me, as someone who's teaching to grad students, that most of my students are either working or they will be in the job market soon, it is very important to teach students to be AI competent. One of the things that the study shows is that 71% of employers are would rather to hire someone with the AI with the AI knowledge compared to someone that doesn't have, that has too many years of experience. So this is the job market that we are going through, and it's very important, to have students, teaching that, to learn students to how to use it. So how many of you are teaching any quantitative method course, or have taught any? And how many of you are using AI in your class, in that quantitative method, within that quantitative method? So, to me, using, AI up to this semester was just, by, for this particular course, was that I just, use, one of the, questions that I had, I give it to AI and I ask it to reframe it, and, then, it needs, some revision as well, because it's not very good in, in terms of statistical, in terms of statistical terminology yet. So it needs still, revision. I, offer students, they can use it, for coding. Still, not always you're getting, something correct. So you need to go back to that. And, students sometimes, can use it, for, in a manner that, they can, simplify any particular, terminology or any, knowledge. But to me, it wasn't, enough, and it didn't, take them into, learning how to use AI for this particular, class. So one of the assignments that we had at the end of the semester is that the students need to write a policy memo, which is a very short policy memo of 4-page. And I think that I can use that in that manner. So that's what I come up with, and I divide the policy memo submission to 3 submissions. At the beginning, I asked them to think about the questions, the testable questions that they want to answer. And based on that, and so for this part, I didn't recommend them to use AI. So think about the question yourself and look for the data set that exists, and you can serve that to answer the question of the interest that you have. And then, after that, I created a prompt and I give that to the students, and I asked the student to use that to write their proposal. So here is what I created. I created a prompt, and I use AI as a supportive mentor. I use AI as something that it can help students with a professional job market, and with the professional skills and tools which is needed for the job market. I ask AI to have the Socratic questionings and ask lots of questions to the students. And also I ask AI to go over different sections which are inside of the proposal and they need to submit, and ask them lots of questions, doesn't let them to move on to the next step until they complete a part. And using that, students were able to deepening their understanding of the topic before jumping to doing the research. So they had their idea first, and this is something which is recommended by the MIT study if you read that. They start and initiate by themselves, and then they use AI. So the outcome is going to be more productive than just starting brainstorming with AI. So it is important that they have that human literacy and research at the beginning, and then use AI. So they need to submit 1 page of proposal. And they use maybe their outcome from the from the AI is about 4-page long, but they need to summarize it and submit it. And then for the end of the semester, for the final paper, I just used AI as a checklist, and they used it not to just to make sure that they include everything. So, and after that, I had the reflection activity, and due to that reflection activity, they need to mention that what works for them. So most of them were agree that it depends their understanding of the topic, and the professional toning was very important for them. And what didn't work for them, sometimes AI take them to the off the topic, and I asked the student to push back. Some of them didn't push back, and they get into the trap with the AI, and it redirect them from where they want to be. And then the important part was that I asked them to revise the prompt that I created for them, because I think this is very important for them to in the job market. They are not going to be given any prompt, so they need to write down the prompt. So they go back to the prompt, they revise the prompt, so they to the way that so it can cover and serve them the best as the best possible. So compared to those students that they use it correctly, and they had lots of pushback, and they pursue to the purpose that they have, their proposal was much better, and they had a very good start and a strong start of their project. There are some students that they trap with AI, and they just said yes to every question, and they weren't able to get a good direction in their AI. And yes, even with the grad students, I had some grad students that they didn't read the instruction. They just used their own prompt, and that was what I expected, and the result was very different. So I think it is very important to make the use of AI in a way that they understand and how they can use it later in the job market. And I think that reflection activity was very helpful for them to revise the prompt themselves. So thank you so much for being here.
Hi, I'm your librarian. So I am really happy that you shared this. I had a student that came and met with me to help find data sets, and we noticed that I love your exercise because I think that it really helps them start to develop a deeper understanding of the complexity of data sets. But the AI tool wasn't really identifying data sets, and I think it was taking them to places that were unfamiliar to them. And so I wondered how you are getting students to then deepen their investigative skills to find the data sets. Maybe they just need to come talk to me, or maybe I need to come to your class. But.
So thank you so much. And that was my suggestion at the very beginning of the semester. I told them that do not use AI to look for the data. Have the data before going through the proposal. So I give them 9 weeks until I give them the prompt. So I didn't give them the prompt at the beginning of the semester. I asked them to find your questions, and then after the question find the data set. I had your email and your everything inside of the instruction, and so that's that's the part that they need to, maybe I need to emphasize that a little bit, more at the beginning.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sure. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I was wondering. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. I was wondering, in your assignment, do you stress the importance of any type of prompt writing frameworks, such as Gold or Rice? And if so, were there any that were more successful than others? Thank you.
Sure. So, I gave them the prompt, right? So I created the prompt. I made, lots of, my, conversation with AI before, giving them. So I, went through all of that, myself, and, I used even, other, AIs to check to see, whether, my prompt is working. I gave, and also, I asked them to use the study mode, on the chip, if they use the ChatGPT or guided learning in, in Gemini. So I think, the matter of, getting, right to the prompt and, using the prompt, correctly is, one thing, and then, be able to, to correct it in a way that, serve them the best. So is the skill that, they were able to catch, throughout this process. All right, thank you so much.